What about let's talk about how to identify when you're in an area with a lot of bait. Is that something y'all want us to discuss? Because I think a lot of people probably have that and kind of know what to do to how to identify when bait's in an area. But some of the guys that may be a little more novice or just less experienced this time of year may not really understand how to know bait is in an area. So birds, we talk about birds a lot. Birds are when fish are shallow. Birds, the stabbing birds, the fishing birds. The cranes, the white, big white egrets. Not the little. You'll see little cattle egrets on the water sometimes. Don't pay any attention to them. The white egrets can help you some, especially this time of year when little bait is in abundance on the bank. White egrets will feed on that, and bass are feeding on the smaller bait this time of year too, even bigger bass. But the blue herons the blue herons are always, anytime you see, I'll tell you something else about a blue heron. A blue heron is it's a solo creature. He does not want to be with other blue herons. Most of the time when you see a blue heron, he's by himself. If you see even just 2, especially 3 or 4 or 5 blue herons on the same stretch of bank, oh yeah, like there's some good bait for bass to feed on there, because blue herons they'll eat the smaller bait like bass will this time of year. They prefer to eat the bigger bait. They prefer to eat the big threadfin, the gizzard shad, the brim. They prefer to eat the same thing that bigger bass eat. And if you look at a blue heron compared to a white egret, the neck is much bigger, right? You look at the birds that have big necks, they eat the same thing that big bass eat. You look at the birds that have skinny necks, they eat the same thing that tiny bass eat, right? That's kind of my rule of thumb for it. So that's the first thing to look for is birds, and that's the easiest way to identify it. The other easy way, when you get a calm day or you're in a calm pocket, it helps a lot, because especially when the sun's out and it's calm, those shad are gonna rise, right? And when they rise, a lot of times you'll see them you'll see it looks like little bubbles. Well, that's actually shad just right below the surface, swirling the water or popping the top a little bit, see them flicking around a little bit. That's the other obvious way. I think everybody knows how to identify that, right? Like everybody understands what that is and knows how to identify that. Outside of that, knowing when bait is in an area becomes pretty dependent on your electronics, okay? Humminbird 360 can identify bait in a big way. Mm-hmm. These new live things, unbelievable how well they can identify bait balls. I mean, you can see the bait ball move and see the individual bait fish come out of it and go back into it. It's crazy the detail you can see on those if you get them going right. But you really have to start depending on your electronics. And does everybody in here have fairly modern electronics? At least side imaging, right? At least side imaging. Okay. So maybe what you do, if you don't have a Humminbird 360 and a live sonar type deal, is you just idle through an area with your side imaging going, mm-hmm. and you look for bait, right? But you got to find the bait this time of year. Everything, we're getting to that time of year. Now we're in full turnover mode as we progress into the fall bite. The only thing fish are worried about is bait. Whether you're deep or shallow, if there's not a ton of shad around, the odds are you're not going to have any bass there. They're going to be around a bunch of bait. So idle with side imaging. But boy, if you have Humminbird 360 and that live stuff, either one, as you're fishing, you need to be constantly aware of your electronics. You need to be fishing and looking down at your screen the whole time, because you need to identify if there's bait in there. And if you zip through an area and you don't see any bait, man, move on, keep going. But again, a lot of times my success this time of year, I'll be zipping along and then all of a sudden I'll see all the signs of life, and then I'll stop and slow down and I'll catch fish. So sometimes my most successful areas when we're dealing with this tough conditions is without even getting a bite, something tells me to stop and we slow down, whether it's the birds, the bait fish on the surface, or on my electronics. Do you know any other way to identify bait in an area? That's about all I got. I mean, the obvious stuff, seeing the bait fish around the surface, and then make sure you have good glasses, right? If you have good glasses, that helps, because a lot of times those shad, if you've got a bunch of shad in an area and you're trolling through 2 foot of water or whatever, 3 foot of water, you're going to see those shad below the surface, a foot below the surface, 6 inches, whatever, and they'll be there. Like that bait ball in that shallow water is going to be close enough to the surface for you to see them with your glasses.
And sometimes they'll be in a ball the size of the top of one of them chairs. You'll just see like a little wad of them.
Sometimes it'll be bigger than your boat.
Yeah, the size of your boat, or like a half acre. Like you'll see just wads somewhere. You're like, like almost look like how wind will make the slight little ripply. But what in the world? You get over there close to it, be a whole bunch of them big old 4 and 5 inch shad just roaming.
Especially as we get past the turnover a little more and get into the real fall bite, you will see massive wads of shad in the backs of these creeks and pockets at times.
But yeah, like a lot of times, like if I'm just going out fun fishing, just covering water, just trying to figure out an area, that side imaging, I'll just cruise down close enough to where my side imaging will reach almost all the way to the bank if you can. I know there's spots where the trees are so bad, but I just cruise down through there. Obviously, like keep your eyes up, look for the birds, because they might not be on one side, especially like if wind's blowing. You may have a pocket that runs east and west, but you got a north-south wind. You might have a north wind blowing, and all the birds will be on one bank or the other bank or whatever, because those shad will get pushed up in the little nooks and crannies. I mean, a spot the size of this room, they'll all be piled up there, and the whole rest of that cove will be
like today,
bone dry.
You started over there on that left side of that pocket, and I started on the right side. Did you see all that activity on the left side?
Yeah.
Okay.
The water, but what was wild is that very front part, like where I sat down and pulled up some rods and all that by them boys catfishing, that water had all that nasty gunk on it.
At the mouth. At
the mouth of it, I didn't make it probably 50 yards in. The water got a little bit cleaner. The junk wasn't floating around. Like the more I got into it, the cleaner it got. And the more and more shad, like I was sitting there just fishing along, and I literally looked down and shad just running beside my boat. And I'm like, that's a pretty good size, them big old, 3-4 inchers. And then the next little water bait will be them little bitty, almost look like fry. They look like ghostmen. Is what
I call them thumbnail shad. They're just like little, that size of your thumbnail.
Almost clear looking.
Yeah, it's that's weird. That's what they do. It's what we said in the beginning, man. That lake starts turning over, and they just go. They get out of it. And the way they get out of it is they go to the bank, where there's not as much turnover effect, and they get more oxygen from the wind turning it up and all that. That's exactly what they do. So. Yeah,
and like you'll start seeing a lot more. Like once the water temp drops about another 5 or 6 degrees, you'll start seeing a lot more of those those wolf packs of bass. Those 2-pounders, 3-pounders that'll be little gangs. There'll be 5 or 6 of them, and if they ever show themselves, it's like shooting fish in a barrel, because you can pitch that swim jig. And then they'll get right up on the bank to where, and a lot of times you can almost see them like you're sight fishing, because you'll see them swim up on the bank real shallow, like their backs almost come out of the water, and you can throw over there and usually pop a couple of them. Like I know that happens a bunch. Like I haven't seen any of that yet. That water's still in the 80s or whatever. So I mean, like once it starts getting into we're low to mid 70s, you'll start seeing a lot more of that.
We're like one. I told this somebody today before we went out. We're one hard cold front away.
Yeah.
Like that's where we are. That's the other part that's cool about us being in the middle of this turnover funk is we're a one good cold front away. Like one good solid. Hey man, we need to wear some long pants and a hoodie in the morning. Like when that happens, for a few days, it's gonna be on shortly thereafter, right? Like big time. So. That's all we need is one more cold front, and that'll go down. And then, what you'll see is, like what Court's saying, they'll start packing up. And the schools of baitfish will get bigger, too.
Yeah, they'll start grouping
so
up
all those fish that just ran out of deep water and went to the bank spread out for turnover, a lot of those fish, once it starts to do, the longer they stay up there, and the better the water conditions get, the more active they get, they're going to start to congregate. The bait fish are going to start to gather. The bass are going to school up around those bait fish, and they're all going to continue to stay in that shallow water and move further back in a creek, or maybe just move. Some of the fall movements are a little bit random. They are. Some of them are. But they'll move up into shallow water in the backs of pockets and creeks. And then some of those fish that are on the bank right now and bait are going to gather back out deep. But you'll have fish gathered in groups.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's been a long, hard summer. Oxygen is now right in the water again. Temperatures are starting to feel better. And they got one thing to do. That's eat.
Yep.
They're not worried about spawning. None of them are worried about spawning. None of them are worried about anything other than eating as many shad as they can. And they really get hyper-focused on shad in the fall because they're feeding on these big, massive schools of shad that occur after the turnover. So it's really fun. It can be frustrating at times because the fish do move a lot in the fall. And so you can they group up in big groups, which makes a higher percentage of the lake empty, and they move on you a lot. So it's hard to stay with them in the fall. It's hard to stay. But boy, when you collide with them in the fall, it's like some of the best fishing you'll ever experience in your life.
Oh, I've had some of my best days, even like duration of my life. Some of my best days is throwing a spinnerbait, just power fishing, just like Kevin Van Dam mentality. See how many miles of water you can cover in a day.
Banging them.
Oh yeah, just beat them to death. And when like you said, when they start getting grouped up, then you can kind of do whatever.
Yep.
Like if you can kind of figure out those schools that get out deep, You can be like, I'm going to go throw a jig out in 20 foot of water. You can do that for a little bit, bomb some bigs, and then you can be like, I'm going to throw a chatterbait in the grass, and you can, go up to the bank. You can just like junk and power fish. That's why I like the fall.
You get the two-way go in the fall for sure. You get the groups of fish up shallow, groups of fish way out deep offshore that get really deep in the fall sometimes, but they get out there and group up. And
jigging spoons and stuff like that.
Become like, Alabama rigs, deep diving crankbaits. I mean, you can catch them on a lot of stuff in the fall.
Yeah.
You can catch them on a lot of stuff in the fall. It's funny you say that. It's some of the best days. I've only had this salmon a few times, and I've had a 40-pound best five a few times in my life, and the first time it ever happened was like the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It was as fall gets. And that was the first time I ever caught a 40-pound bag. So absolutely some of the best days. And the cool part about the fall is, a lot of times, like you get those giant bags in the springtime, you might not catch 10 or 12 fish. You just have 5 big bites. You might catch 15. You got 5 big. When we caught that 40-pound bag in the fall, our next bag behind that was 30, and our next bag behind that was 25. Like, we caught big fish all day long, buddy. We landed and collided with a couple different schools of big ones, and it was just like, I'll tell you this too, this was also in November. I had a day on Lake Fork back in I believe it was 2011, when it was at the all-time low. It was 2011. It was November of that year. I had a day where I was fishing up shallow early in the morning, just looking for some top water, spinnerbait fish up shallow, and I was on this point at the mouth of this cove, and some fish surfaced out deeper on the point behind me. So I turned around and went over there, and when I did, my graph just lit up. I mean, just lit up like the school was so big it covered the whole screen. So I dug around for a buoy marker, threw it out off to the side of that school, repositioned the boat. Didn't have spotlight back in, but had my buoy marker lined up, repositioned the boat, and we sat there and threw out to the left side of that buoy marker for 4 hours. For 4 straight hours, we threw at that buoy marker. And I bet we didn't go more than 5 or 10 minutes without a bite in 4 hours, and everything was between 3 and 7 or 8 pounds. For 4 hours straight, just nonstop catching them. That's how massive some of these schools get in the fall. Yeah, it's awesome fishing in the fall. It really is.
So especially when that water temp starts dipping. I personally like it when it starts breaking down in like the low to mid 60s, and even like somewhere around there, like 60 to 65 is my favorite, because you can get, I've had some of my best days throwing a top water whenever that water's like 58 to like 65, throwing a buzz bait and just 5, 6, just wearing them out.
That's some Oklahoma bass, though. See, that's some Oklahoma bass.
That was in Texas, bro.
These Texas bass, they like a little bit warm. No, I'm just kidding. A bass is a bass no matter where he lives, that's for sure. Florida bass is different than a northern strain, though. There's no, that.
No, yeah.
But, pretty much, even in Oklahoma, you guys have a lot of Florida strain influence there. And we have a ton of Florida strain influence in all of our Texas lakes, thanks to Texas Parks and Wildlife, which is why Texas is the shining light of the bass fishing world right now, because of the Texas Parks and Wildlife and their Florida strain stocking program. So.
Yeah, I don't know how many sharelunkers went to the deal this year.
There was like 87 in one day out of OH Ivy this year. So I'm pretty sure. Stupid. I don't know how many it was, but they caught every 13-pounder that's ever existed in one day at OH Ivy this year. It felt like. It was crazy.
I got the biggest bass they've caught out of here in what, like 10 or 12 years? And
No. We had a 16-pounder that was caught on live bait. We had a 16-pounder. I want to say, it might have been about 7 or 8 years ago. Maybe 9, somewhere in there. It was about that time, about 8 years ago or so. There was, I believe the guy's name was Quisenberry. He caught a 16-pounder on a black salty. We had another 15-pounder out of here just the last, 2 or 3 years ago. A guy caught it when the lake was high and muddy in March. A guy caught it in about 4 foot of water on a black and blue flipping jig, caught a 15-pounder. How much fun would that be to be flipping a black and blue jig in 4 foot of water on timber in the springtime, and you just pull into a 15-pounder, dude? Can you imagine what that felt like? He probably thought, I guarantee he was one, I would bet money he was one of those guys that has this story. I set the hook, and I thought I was hung up. And then whatever I was hung up on started swimming. We've all heard that story from Lake Fork, right? That 15-pounder on a short line on flipping a jig and 4 foot, it had to be that way, right?
Oh, yeah.
You just go, thunk, and it doesn't move. And you're just like, oh, I'm hung up. And then it goes,
Well, I know I've done that like with 6s and 7s on a jerk bait, popping along and go, thunk, and it literally just sit there, and then all of a sudden you feel big head shakes, and you're like, oh no, I don't know how
big
big
this is. A deep diving crankbait too, right? When you got so much line out, you can't really feel it. You just wind and wind and wind, and it just stops, and you're like, there's nothing there. And then
stop, and you're trying to pull like to see if it'll pop up over the deal, and then all of a sudden it goes doo-doo.
Yeah, all of a sudden they feel the head shake. Yeah, and the slower the head shake is, the bigger the fish is. Like the longer each side it takes for him to shake his head, that's the bigger the fish is.
The closer you come to a heart attack too.
Yeah. Especially when they jump with a big crankbait in their mouth. Golly, that's where these gray hairs in my beard have come from, is from jumping fish with deep diving crankbaits in their mouth.
I'm more scared of it.
Or my kids. I'm not real sure which one.
Jerkbait's worse.
Jerkbait's worse, yeah. Jerkbait's bad too. Y'all got some questions tonight? I know we want to answer some questions now. I told y'all to think of questions.
I do. So does the pockets where the grass is plentiful, does that affect turnover at all? I mean...
Well, it helps keep some of the dirtiness out. Right. It does make a good place for fish to end up.
Okay.
I will say, especially earlier in the turnover this year, I found that those were the pockets, like when because we've kind of been dealing with this for a couple, 3 weeks where they have a little bit of turnover conditions, not really, kind of, sort of. Earlier in the process, those were the pockets that clearly had more fish than others. Now that we're kind of in what I'm thinking is pretty much our full turnover process for this year, it can be any pocket now. I mean, it can be any bank line, any pocket now. Earlier, when it first started, it did seem like the pockets that had the healthier underwater vegetation, coontail, hydrilla, they definitely had more life in them and were holding more active bass in them. Now it's kind of like, one's got grass, it's got fish in there, and then this one has no grass that we were just in a day, and there was so much life in there.
Oh, yeah.
So much life in there. And I literally would not have fished that pocket other than we had a seminar in 2 hours, so we just ran over there and fished for an hour and then came back. I'll be going there on my guide trip next week.
Yeah.
On my guide trips next week, we're going to be going to that pocket because there's so much life in there. So, it can be a little bit anywhere now. We're full turnover. There's fish pulling up shallow all over the lake right now.
How many times do the shad spawn?
Shad?
Does the turnover affect their spawn? Is it like in between any of their cycles?
No, man. To my knowledge, shad spawn once a year. Once a year. The only one that I know that spawns multiple times a year is brim, and typically it's just the hybrid brim, the hybrid bluegills that are crossbreed. They'll spawn as many as 3 times a year, but regular bluegill, some of them will spawn twice, some of them will only spawn once. Every other fish species, to my knowledge, only spawns once, and shad are that way. So the shad spawn kind of correlates to the second half. It starts basically in the second half of the bass spawn. You never know exactly what, like the date it's going to be, the beginning of April. You don't know, because if water conditions are too cold or whatever, they may try to, but they don't because the water's too cold, stuff like that. So typically it's anywhere from April to June is shad spawn around here. But what it does is it correlates with the second half of the bass spawn. So once you know the bass have been spawning for a while and you're kind of like getting to that mid-halfway cycle, which, by the way, the bass spawn out here lasts about 3 months. So once you're about a month into the bass spawn, you want to start looking for signs of shad spawn. And you'll really know when the shad spawn, the birds give that away. And that's the number one time to use the birds we talked about, the big egrets and the blue herons. They give that away clear as day every morning during shad spawn out here. Yeah. I mean, I'll literally, when shad spawn's going on, I'll put my boat in, I'll run down the south end of the lake where it's more wide open and you can kind of run outside the boat lanes. And I will literally just have my boat barely on plane and just driving and just looking for birds. Just drive up Little Caney, look for birds. Drive up Cheney, look for birds. Drive up Dale, look for birds. Just driving in creeks, looking at points, just looking at banks, just looking for birds. And when I see 3, 4, 5 blue herons lined up, we're finna go in there and whack them. I mean, that's just how it works. It's really that simple for shad spawn.
And it lasts about that long, it seems like, in the
some
mornings.
days, yeah. Some days it doesn't last long.
You can miss on anything. They'll be on a dock. They'll be on
the clay points. The clay points are good to look at. The clay points, the shellbed points are good to look at, especially for gizzard shad. But yeah, especially threadfin, they can spawn the most. I mean, I'll always remember this one because I don't know why this one stands out so much, but it does. It's been years ago, and I've done it since, and those don't really stand out. But I was going into the back of a pocket to throw a frog early in the morning because we had an early morning frog bite, and this was April. And I'm driving into this pocket, and I'm on a guide trip, and I got a couple guys that are they were inexperienced, like really inexperienced. So we're going back there. We're headed back to the grass, and we're about halfway into this creek, and I just look over, and there's 3 blue herons lined up on just, a main lake bank right at the mouth of this creek that has nothing. There's no points. There's no contours. There's no timber. It's just a flat piece of bank that I would never, ever fish. I fished it one morning in my life. I've never fished it since or before. But those blue herons lined up there, we pulled up over there. I handed them a square bill and a swim jig, and on the first cast, they were doubled up. Because there was herons lined up, there was wind blowing in that bank, and that's where the shad were spawning that morning. And the next day, they weren't spawning there. I went back and looked the next day. They weren't there the next day. So it's the birds are the telltale deal on that. But shad spawn once a year. Bluegill will spawn. So the way the spawn cycles work is crappie spawn first, right? Crappie spawn first. Gizzard shad will actually start spawning about the same time crappie do. But it's gizzard shad spawn. That is the biggest roll of the dice trying to find that and fish it. What I do know is gizzard shad roll up on them shallow points every day from really sometimes late January, but really February, all the way through June. Gizzard shad off and on roll up on those shallow points, whether they're spawning or not. And you can catch big bass eating them when you get your timing right on those shallow points, but it's pretty random at times. But crappie spawn first in upper 50s. About the time the crappie get going real good or kind of get to the second half of their spawn, bass will start spawning. About the time bass are going good, get about halfway through their spawn, shad will start spawning. And about the time the shad are just about getting done spawning, the brim will start spawning. Right when the bass spawn ends completely and the shad spawn's still kind of going on but been going on for a little while, the brim starts spawning. As soon as the bass spawn is over, there's a whole bunch of bass up shallow and they're hungry and they sit around brim beds, and that's a really good way to target bass. Brim spawn fishing on Lake Fork is one of the most overlooked and underutilized patterns of the year. Every single year I make hay on that, and it is the easiest fishing in the world. You go find a brim bed, you pull out away from the brim bed, and you pitch to every piece of timber around the brim bed with just a Texas rig creature bait or a little jig. It's the easiest fishing. It's like fishing a pond when you were a kid with a worm. And it's target fishing. It's so easy. And I almost never see anyone else doing it. And that pattern is every single year on Lake Fork.
Swim jig's a really good one for that brim spawn.
Swim jig, and I'll throw bluegill colored square bills. If it's windy in areas where the brim beds are, like if I know brim beds are in an area and it's windy down that bank where those brim beds are, oh yeah, swim jig and a square bill will dust them off around that.
Oh yeah.
Usually a lot of times though, you're finding brim beds in pockets and there's not a lot of wind, and I usually just flip in those areas where it's calm. But if I get wind on brim beds, yes, absolutely. And a swim jig is just a good bait to throw anytime fish are shallow and around junk.
Yeah.
Post spawn fish, spawn fish, fall fish. If they're around junk and it's shallow, swim jigs, great.
Swim jigs are one of my search
I know you
tools
throw it a lot.
in the springtime. I do it because I can get up shallow where I can see, and that's what I'll throw, like in the grass around the timber. Well, I'm looking really shallow, but I'm kind of paralleling the bank, throwing up in the stuff, and sometimes I'll get a giveaway. Like if I'm not right up on the bank where I can see, I'll hit a stretch about 100 yards long, and I'll catch a couple males, like bam, 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 and I'm like,
we got some fish on that stretch.
There's males here. That means the female's got to be somewhere, and I'll just turn right back around. Then you turn the trolling motor, as hard as it is for me to do it, turn the trolling motor down to like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And you're up there peeking around, utilizing your glasses.
Then you're in my world.
Yeah.
Sight fishing's my deal, man. I love it so much. I think that's probably why, I'll be honest with you, this live sonar stuff that I'm just now really getting into full on, which I'm way late on that, but I think I'm going to get obsessed with it, and I already kind of am, because it's like sight fishing. I mean, it is. It's sight fishing. It's really no different in principle. I'm seeing the fish. Yeah, I might lose him for a minute. He might wander off the screen, but I'm going to throw my bait where he was. I'm going to see if he'll react to my bait and come look at it. If he'll react to my bait and come look at it, now can I make him bite with this bait or that bait or whatever bait? It's just sight fishing. It's the same thing, and I love sight fishing. I've had so much success sight fishing that I'm just going to get obsessed with this thing. I'm going to have the most frustrated customers ever, because they're going to be standing on the boat deck. They'll be like, why have we been here for 45 minutes? I'm going to be like, because that 10-pounder is still on that tree, dog.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there looking at you bait. Catch him. Shake it a little harder. Shake it a little lighter. All that stuff. I mean, it's sight fishing. It's addicting. I love it. I absolutely love it. It mixes hunting and fishing is what it does. You become this situation where it's like stalking a game animal, right? A deer or whatever. you're hunting the fish down, you're looking for them, you're tracking them, you're locating. Okay, now you located, you know he's in that area. Now you got to get him set up right for the kill, right? Now you're trying to get him set up right. All right, he's sticking to that piece of cover. Let me throw this jig over there. Let me throw this jerk bait over there. It becomes hunting, but yet you're fishing at the same time. It's awesome, man. I love it. Any more questions? There's got to be more questions.
How do you, whenever you go into a pocket that has a lot of timber in it, how do you know where to start? Like, we're used to fishing grass, so we pull into a pocket today and it's just trees as far as you can see.
I hit every single one.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
How do you eliminate like
That rub rail's going to earn its money on your boat. Your rub rail on your boat, it earns its money out here.
Like,
Yeah.
what did you go through today? I was like, everything.
Yeah.
I have racing stripes on my boat.
Yeah.
So similar, this will help you because you're used to fishing a lot of grass, right? So similar to when you have an overwhelming amount of grass out here on Lake Fork, you have an overwhelming amount of timber, right? What you got to do most of the year is pay attention to bottom contours. Okay, just like if you're at Lake Gunnersville and you've got a 5 mile long main lake grass stretch, you got to find the section of that grass stretch that has a point running underneath that mat, or has a hump that's in the middle of that mat, or has a creek channel that swings up against that mat. You got to find the different bottom contours. So Greg Hackney, I was doing an interview with Greg Hackney one time, and he put it this way, and I thought it was so well stated. Cover is timber, grass, boat dock, brush. That's cover. Structure is bottom contours. Creek channel bends, humps, points, pond dams, bottom changes. So structure is cake. Cover is icing. Like, I can eat cake without icing, and it'll be good. I can have a bite or two of icing without cake. It's not going to be very good for very long. If I can combine both, now I'm in business. But I can live with just structure. I can't live with just cover with no contours. Man, that is a never-ending battle and an overwhelming process of just randomness and a lot of tough days. But if you take the structure that's present with the cover, now you're in the jackpot, right? You've just taken that point, that hump, that creek bend, whatever it is, road bed, doesn't matter. You've taken that structure and you've souped it up with timber or grass. So when you get to a lake that has overwhelming amounts of cover, be it timber or grass, you got to focus on the structure. You got to take an area and go, where in this area would I fish if timber didn't exist? Where would I start in this pocket if there was no wood? Well, I'd probably start on that creek bend out the mouth of the creek. And I'll work back on that flat, and it'll work on that point, that secondary point over there. Like, look at it like that. With no cover, fish those areas. Because the whole pocket has cover. Those structure areas are still going to be your most high percentage areas. Does that make sense? That'll help you dial down the maze, right? You get in there, you're like, God, I can flip trees all day in this one pocket. I'll be here for a week.
I did.
Yeah. So you gotta focus on the high percentage areas. Find the structure that goes with it, correlates with it. And when that's done, have confidence in yourself. That's your high percentage area. If that doesn't work, move on to the next one. Yep. What else we got? Well, y'all have asked some good questions tonight. Somebody give us one more. Nothing?
So you find that bait ball.
Mm-hmm.
You got a big bait ball, you're sitting on it. You throw everything you got tied on, you cut it all off and tie on something else, and then you cut it all off again and tie on something else, and they're just not biting anything. Where do you go from there? You're still on the bait ball. You can see them jumping, you hear them coming up.
And you're identifying that there's for sure bass with the bait?
Yes.
Like you're seeing feeding activity?
Yes, they coming out of the water.
And you tried everything you can try. I mean, you just got to start getting creative. Court, I mean,
I'm going to a cafe and eat lunch.
maybe sometimes. Hey, listen. Let's be real honest about this sport. And this isn't really going to answer your question, but it's a lot tougher than we give it credit for. This game that we play, right?
Especially for an animal that's got such a small brain.
This game of bass fishing is a lot tougher than we give it credit for. And you guys see the YouTube videos. Well, what y'all don't know, I mean, it's not like I'm hiding anything, but like all week long I'm fishing and I'm going, where's the best lake that I can go catch some fish on camera at? And Fork ain't fishing good. Like next week, you're going to see me and Cord on a video. We're not fishing on Fort. Well, that's because we had guide trips on Monday and Tuesday. We filmed on Wednesday. We're like, dude, we ain't going back there. You know what I mean? Like, we all struggle. The guys at the top struggle way more than you think they do. Way more. I mean, these guys go to the best lakes in the country most of the time on the Bassmaster Elite Series and the Bass Pro Tour. They're at the best lakes in the country most of the time. Do me a favor. Look at the bottom half of the standings. Go back and look at last year's results on Lake Chickamauga, the Harris Chain, Lake Fork in April. Lake Fork in April, the year it's rated the #1 bass lake in the country. Look at the bottom half of the Bassmaster Elite Series from Lake Fork in April this last year. Hey, I got news for you. Those guys are better than us. Like those guys on the Elite Series, they're better than us. They're better than all of y'all. They're better than me. They're better than Cord. They're the best in the world. They are the Major League, NFL, NHL, NBA.
And you got some of them coming out here in April catching like 8 pounds. You know.
See what I'm saying? So, yeah, Lee Livesey caught 40 pounds on the last day, or 38, or what, 42, or what, 42 pounds? Yeah. Went over 40. So, yeah, Lee Livesey, who knows this lake better than anyone these days and was the best guide on this lake for a few years before he started going out on tournaments, he lined it all up. But look at his other days. I think he had like a 15-pound day in there. And this is the best dude on this pond in April, and he caught 15 pounds on Lake Fork. And then there's guys that are like stupid good, like all-time greats in bass fishing that come to Lake Fork in April and catch less than 10 pounds. Some of them won't catch 1 or 2 fish in a day. Yeah. This game's a lot. Like, we all struggle more than we admit, right? We all see the highlight reels. Like, hey, go look at those Lake Fork guide pages right now. Ain't nobody posting a lot of fish pictures. And when they do, it's from the good day. They don't post them every day. Even during the springtime, Lake Fork guys don't post pictures every day. You know why? Because they don't catch them every day. They catch some, but they don't catch them good every day. You know, it's pretty rare. The better guides, it's pretty rare to have a 0, especially in spring, you know, especially the first half of summer, even pre-spawn. It's pretty rare to have a 0. I once went almost 2 years without a 0 in my boat for a day. And that was like, I thought that was the craziest thing ever that I was so proud of that. And the day that broke and I zeroed, I was depressed for a week or two after that. Because, like, I'll never do that again. The realistic perspective is that's never going to happen again unless the lake just gets completely on fire for a couple of years, right? Like, it'll never happen again. So when you can't catch fish that you can obviously see, the only thing that I can tell you is you're not the only one. Think about what we're doing. Have you ever eaten a plastic hot dog or a metal hamburger? That's what they're doing, or we wouldn't be out there. And so when they don't eat the plastic hot dog or the metal hamburger, kind of makes sense. You know, they're just not falling for it that day.
Only thing I know to do that I've done in the past that similar, where you take all the baits you can think of. You throw the jerk bait through there. You throw your A-rig through there. You throw the crankbait or the rattle trap. Something I've done, I don't think I've really done it here yet, so I can't confirm it here because I haven't had that problem yet. But on other lakes, dumbed it way down, and you fish under them. Instead, it's started to try to catch those fish that are in the middle of that bait that you can see them coming up. And when you throw that spook over the top of them 100 times and you're about ready to sell all your stuff and go home and take up knitting or something, put a damn 1/8 or 1/4 ounce Texas rig on with like a Cinco or something. Simple. And just throw it right through the middle of that bait ball. If you can see them up there, throw it right through the middle and let it hit the bottom. Click your rod in, set it down, get you something to drink, get a candy bar, and come back up and just get annoyingly slow and methodical and just hop that thing around and fish underneath them. And I've done that before, and you'd be surprised. You'll start plucking some fish off because those fish they'll come up and then they'll want to go settle back down, and then every once in a while you'll have one it'll be sitting there looking to Shad and it sees your worm go by and it's like, what? And it'll run down there and it may be 15 foot deep and you're watching it sink all the time. It stops and you're like, what? And then it'll go, zzz, zzz, you know, your line does that little hiccup and you're like, hold on a second. You pick it up. It means He was just sitting there watching them shad, and that worm come flying by his
He just
head.
caught
and,
it.
and he went down there and
Yeah,
got
caught
it.
it, yeah.
Something, I mean, it's something you wouldn't think about because you're
Outside the box, I think the best answer I can give you to that situation when you got schooling feeding bass on big balls of bait and you can't catch them no way, you just got to keep going further outside the box, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all you can do. It doesn't mean you're going to hit the answer. You're not going to every day in this game. But all you can do is go further outside the box. Just specifically for schooling fish, and I think I talked about this last night on the live stream, but a tip Kelly Jordan gave me a long time ago, and of course it works really good because Kelly Jordan gave the tip. On schooling bass is a jigging spoon. Schooling bass roam around on you and they get away from your boat. Sometimes you got to chase them down, right? Well, a jigging spoon you can throw from here to the boat ramp down there at the end of the parking lot. You know, like you can throw a jigging spoon forever. So actually just in a jigging spoon looks a lot like a shad. But a jigging spoon's made to kind of drop down there and hop off the bottom, right? No, we ain't gonna do that. We're gonna throw that jigging spoon out there as far as we can throw it. We're gonna do this, hold it right up and just burn it. And just burn that jigging spoon. It'll just kind of shimmy through that school of shad, shimmy through them schooling bass. And it's something they don't ever see. You can throw it a mile, and when them schoolers get away from you, you can catch up to them easier. And if you just match that spoon to about the size of shad you're seeing come out of the water, keep a half ounce and a 1 ounce jigging spoon in the boat, just an old silver cotton Cordell jigging spoon, throw that sucker out there and burn it back to the boat fast you can. And that will get schooling bass to bite a lot of times. Schooling bass will bite that a lot of times, and like I said, you're so efficient. And, you know, with schooling bass, a lot of times is the faster you can catch one and get one off, the faster you can catch another one. Just keep them going. And so that jigging spoon is a real good way to do that. Yep. All right. Anybody?
Or a cast net, like a 10-footer.
Yeah. Yeah. Go bow fishing.
Yeah.
We'll see how fast your bow trigger is. Choom! Like if you're Hunger Games, you can hit schooling fish with a bow, right? Like Katniss Everdeen could probably shoot a schooling bass with a bow.
Probably.
I don't know. Anyways, yep, we must have reached that time. Anybody got any more questions? All right, hey, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Big shout out to Lake Fort Marina. Y'all go down there, buy some tackle. Hopefully it's from 6 Cents Fishing. If you don't buy it here, go to 6centsfishing.com. Punch in the code Your Lake Fort Guide. Get your 10% discount on all orders. Thank you guys. Let's go get fat, Cord.
Down.
We're good at that.
Real
like we
good.
get lucky and catch a fish every once in a while. We're experts at eating, dog.
Oh, you forgot to tell everybody.
Well, what did I tell everybody?
What happened Tuesday?
Oh, we'll have to see that on the video. It's going to depend on how I edit it.